Greetings, fellow travelers. Welcome to the 59th level of the RPG Cave. I am one of your hosts, the level human and level 99 human archmage, Ryan Turford.
Oh, no.
And I'm joined...
It's breaking down.
Oh my god, everything broke. All right, we'll do the intro one more time. Sorry, folks who are watching live, but OBS decided to be OBS, and this is always fun. So, Garrett, can you move your hands again so I can make sure we can actually see you? By the way, hello everybody. I hope everyone's having it awesome so far. All right, so we'll just redo the intro. We're not going to play the movie again, so we'll go on 5. Greetings, fellow travelers. Welcome to the 59th level of the RPG Cave. I'm one of your hosts, the level 99 human archmage, Ryan Turford, and I'm joined, as always, by the level 99 elf medic, Mr. Garret Bland. Garret, how are you doing this lovely evening? I'm sure we haven't, had to do this intro over again. Of course, this is the first time we're doing this, right?
This is the first time. I'm doing excellent. I'm ready to talk about some games that, we may not speak about a lot in these subgenres, but I'm ready to talk about them. Ready to speak out.
Yeah, same here. I'm actually pretty excited to talk about some games with you tonight, and I think we've got an interesting topic, so we'll definitely get into that in just 1 second. But before all that, we got to clear the dungeon of the pesky mobs, the trash mobs. We want to get them out of the way so we can tackle the raid boss. So folks at home, if you want to support the show, there's a number of awesome ways to do that. Number one, if you're watching the live stream over on youtube.com/carpoolgaming right now, or if you're watching the VOD later, don't forget that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed already, and then ring that bell, ding, 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 to be notified whenever we go live with any of our newest videos. Also, we have a new feature on the channel, which is channel memberships as well. So if you join the channel, you have an option to unlock cool emotes. I believe we actually have a Garret Bland emote coming pretty soon too, which I'm actually fairly excited about. Not only that, but we also have a tier on the membership side that allows you a discount for merch, because now you can buy merch directly from the YouTube channel as well. So if you're interested in all that, the join button is down below as well. If you're listening on audio feeds, don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well, and rate us if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Also, if you want this podcast or some of our other podcasts a little bit early, or some exclusive content, head on over to patreon.com/carpoolgaming. We're also offering the merch perks that I just mentioned over there as well. So if you want a discount on merch, you can also become a patron. That is another way of doing that as well. Speaking of merch as well, if you want an RPG Cave shirt or another Carpool Gaming shirt of some kind, head on over to our merch store, bit.ly/CPG merch. All right, with all that out of the way, Garret, it's time to read from the sacred texts, because you actually presented like a really interesting idea to me off air, when we were kind of planning, what we were going to talk about this week. And we were going to do another debate episode, because we've done a debate episode before, where it was like, action RPGs versus turn-based RPGs. So we went like very, very, very like broad with that one. But we want to get more into like the minutia a little bit tonight. We wanted to do something a little bit different.
Very specific.
Yeah. So we actually decided to each pick a RPG subgenre, and we're going to debate what's better between card battling RPGs on Garrett's side, and then I have chosen dungeon crawling RPGs. Now, funny story. I actually had a very niche idea, because I had this recently in my mind because EVO's going on right now. And then
that's true.
I recently played Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, which is an RPG that's also a fighting game. So I was like, I kind of want to do fighting game RPGs to kind of go against, Garrett's card battling RPGs. So I started doing my research on it, and I'm like, man, there's only like 3 of these that exist. There aren't really that many. Like there are some like fighting games that take advantage of, RPG elements, but for the most part, you don't really have a lot of fighting games that are RPGs, although that idea is really cool and I want to see more of them, especially too, because I think Grand Blue Fantasy Versus actually did a really good job with it, because they have like, it's an Arc System Works game, for those that are unfamiliar with it, and it's like a 2D anime style fighting game based off like a mobile game called Grand Blue Fantasy. But what they decided to do for the story mode is it's like a side-scrolling action RPG instead of a fighting game. but it has all the same moves from the fighting game. The controls are the same from the fighting game, but you're attacking enemies from left to right on these screens. It almost plays like similarly to something like Odin Sphere from Vanillaware.
Oh yeah.
So, but it uses, but it's in a fighting game, which is just super cool. So, shout out to that game. I would love to see more fighting games take on, some RPG elements and be RPGs, because I think that would be really, really, really cool.
And then there's Yakuza, right? Like Yakuza is a fighting RPG.
It's more of a beat 'em up RPG. Right? Like that. Yakuza is closer to something like
differences there.
Yeah, Yakuza is closer to something like Scott Pilgrim or River City Ransom. Like it's a beat 'em up RPG. Like something.
It is a beat 'em up RPG. Okay.
Yeah, River City Girls kind of falls in the same line as well. And I thought about that too, but it's like we also just don't have a lot of those outside of the River City franchise to talk about.
You're right.
So I thought it'd be a little bit less interesting, but maybe people want to hear me talk about more about that. Maybe when we do another one of these eventually, Garrett, maybe I talk about that there. So I decided to go a little bit broader, and I decided to go with dungeon crawling RPGs because we don't really talk about traditional dungeon crawling RPGs on the show very often.
That's
so I
true.
thought that'd be interesting too. So to start things off, Garrett, I feel like, for folks at home who are maybe newer to RPGs or newer to these like niche kind of subgenres, I think we should each define like what we would classify under each one of these. So Garrett, I'll start with you. What would you classify as a card battling RPG? I know it's probably pretty obvious because of the name, but
it's a pretty simple definition for a card battling, a role-playing game. It's basically any kind of role-playing game where all your action and combat and your mechanics is based on cards. And that can be given to you by any form or fashion. You can play it in any form or fashion, but it has to have cards in there. And I think this subgenre is a little bit newer, actually, in the RPG space. It's not a traditional, it's not classical RPG subgenre. You see it, though, a lot, of course, in Magic, in Yu-Gi-Oh!, in Pokemon Trading Card Company, and then, like, Hearthstone came up a little bit later. I played a lot of that, actually. And then now you see a lot of developers. It's like, hey, we can actually just put this in a self-contained game, not a live service competitive online play, but more of a role-playing game. And some developers did a really good job with it. So I'm ready to talk about them.
Well, it's actually kind of funny because like the Yu-Gi-Oh games in particular, I remember playing those games back in the day, and most of those were RPGs until, the Game Boy Advance era, where then they tried to go more in just the traditional card battling without RPG elements. But maybe, I don't know if you have any of those on your list, but that was one that came to mind when you were just talking just now. Cause like I, for example, love playing card games. Like I love Magic the Gathering, for example. I've been playing that since 1995, since the Ice Age set was my very first set, which is a long time ago. And I love that Magic the Gathering, and I wish they did more of that. Cause they haven't really taken a step into the game space besides, they tried just doing like a action RPG called Magic Legends, which was kind of like Diablo. But beyond that, they haven't really tried to do anything else in the RPG realm. So like, I would love to see more of these like traditional card games, maybe try more of that. Or maybe like, I would love to see like a Pokemon take on a card based RPG. Cause we've seen like digital versions of the Pokemon trading card game, and Pokemon's already an RPG. So like, what if they mash those two together, Garrett? I think that'd be pretty cool.
That would be really cool. I would definitely like to see more the Pokemon trading card game. I heard it's good. I heard the mechanics are good too. Like people are really into it and into that Game Boy game. I never got into the Pokemon trading card like games or even the cards. I bought them or got them, but I just like to see the Pokemon on there. I never actually played the game. So yeah, these major franchises, I think they can fill a gap with these trading card games for sure. These role-playing games.
For sure.
That'd be cool.
And the Pokemon trading card games also super fun. I used to play that a lot as well, like the modern version of the game, because I actually do have Pokemon cards somewhere in this room somewhere. But of the three major games like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Magic the Gathering, it's probably my third pick, but I still think it's really fun too. So I think that there's a lot of great options for like role-playing games based off Pokemon and based off cards. But as for me, dungeon crawling RPGs, Now, most people think of this as like one style of game, but basically what I would consider a dungeon crawling RPG is not so much a game that's open world, but the focused on the RPG itself being the element of exploring a dungeon or multiple dungeons that are linked together, but you're not really exploring an open world or anything like that. So
Yeah.
my first example will probably spell this out really well, and I may as well just transition to it because I think it'll just be an easier way of explaining this. So most people are very familiar with Diablo 2 and 3, but not everyone is very familiar with Diablo 1, the original, aka just Diablo, the original game on PC and then PlayStation 1. And basically what I would consider Diablo 2 and 3 to be would be like non-linear dungeon crawling games, or kind of open world evolutions of dungeon crawling games, but they're not like traditional dungeon crawlers in the way that the original Diablo was, where the only place you could explore in the original Diablo outside of the giant dungeon below the church in Tristram was the town that you went back to sell your items and whatnot, which is it still counts within the genre, because again, you don't have this giant open world ahead of you to explore. You don't have a bunch of areas that you're really traveling to. You have the one town, and then you just go into the dungeon. You go deeper and deeper in that dungeon. Like, that's how that game is designed, and it's very focused on that original dungeon. So I think Diablo is like the classic example of a classic dungeon crawling RPG, and I love the original Diablo still. I love that it has like a different feel from the other Diablo games, because it almost feels like as you're going through each level of this church, you're like descending further into hell, because like you've got like normal church kind of catacombs to start off with the first like 5 levels deep, and then the next 5 levels you're in this like cave kind of area, and then the next 5 levels after that you start to see like molten lava start to run through there, and then the final like 5 levels in the dungeon, it's like you're basically in hell at that point. So I love kind of the progression and kind of descent into madness that game has going to it. And again, it just feels like the most classic of dungeon crawlers at that point. And it was really like an innovative game, because we just didn't really have a lot of hack and slash type dungeon crawlers at the time that this came out. A lot of dungeon crawlers at the time that Diablo came out were more about like first person exploration in dungeons. And I'll have more examples of that a little bit later. But this was one of the first ones that I can remember, one of the first dungeon crawlers that I can remember that was third person and tried to be very cinematic in its storytelling and its feel. So Diablo.
When did it come out? I'm curious.
I think I should have looked this up ahead of time. I think it is 1997, but I'm going to double check
1997
to confirm.
Let's see that.
Yeah. January 3rd, 1997. Because I remember playing
I see, December 31st, 1996.
Well, that's what Google told me when I Googled it. But it doesn't matter.
US retailers. Wow, that's like the day before 1997. Wow.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Kind of crazy.
But I remember playing that game on my Pentium 1, Garrett. Yeah, back in my day, I'm going to get my walking stick out pretty soon, just talking about this game. Because I remember, like, when I was in high school, of course, my family members knew that PC games were what I was really into at the time. So, if they wanted to get me a game for my birthday or something like that, they'd want to get me a PC game. And I remember my dad was telling me this story about how he went into a Best Buy, which at the time was just Future Shop here in Canada. And he was walking around the PC aisle, and he saw a computer set up, like a really old computer set up with a copy of Diablo running on it. And it as like an in-store demo. And he's like, "Oh, what's this game?" And he was having so much fun playing it. He spent like almost an hour in the store just playing Diablo 1. And he's like, "Oh, I get, awesome. My son would actually like this." And then he looked on the back of the box. He's like, "Oh, our computer can't run this. So we need to go out and, cause I had, at the time it came out, I still had my 486 computer. And so we had to, that was actually one of the games that actually caused us to upgrade to a Pentium computer.
That's cool.
Was Diablo 1. So it was because of that game, because my dad was so addicted to it. He's like, all right, we need to just, throw a bunch of money at this, because we need a version of Diablo that works. So there you go.
Nice.
Diablo 1. I spent so much time playing that game. That game's amazing, and it's one of the best dungeon crawlers out there, and it's one of the best examples of it. So there you go.
Yes.
All right. Garrett, hit me with a card battling game.
I believe no one can beat the classic Diablo one and the explanation of that. That's super cool. Really cool memory. I want to break ground. This is actually one of the first games that on my list was released, so I'll probably go chronologically, actually. So the first game, of course, everyone knows I was swallowed into when I was going on my trip over to New York City just a few weeks back. That is Slay the Spire. This is a roguelike deck building role playing game. Came out late 2017 on PC and then to consoles later. I've been playing it on my Switch. It's been great. It's also on Game Pass as well. I believe it's still on Game Pass, so check that out.
Actually,
But
I think it left
I think it's out.
recently, or if it hasn't, I know it's leaving soon.
Okay, sounds good. Well, guys, if you can play it on Game Pass, do it. It's awesome. Okay, so Slay the Spire. Basically, it is a roguelite first and foremost, where you pick a class in the beginning, and each of these characters have a certain like set of like strategy behind it, and then you go through like it's kind of like dungeon crawling. You're going through a series of card battles against enemies, and then as you progress through each battle, you get a new card. And this new card you get to choose from like three cards. And then you just keep on progressing that character until you lose and you have to restart. Now you get some permanent upgrades as you go along, which is really nice. You unlock characters later. So it's not just purely roguelite like that. This deck building game is very addictive where in the beginning you just have attack and defense cards at the beginning and you only have a limited number of like mana, right, to like as a cost for these cards. And so it's pretty simple in the beginning, so it's pretty easy to get your like hands around, and you attack the monsters that have health points. Guys, it's a role-playing game. This is basically a turn-based role-playing game with cards. That's the only difference. The cards are there and the cards are meant to be your action. And as you progress, you figure out what strategy you want to use on a character. One could be like you want to discard cards as much as possible, so some other permanent upgrades can go up, like some buffs can go up for you, or healing, or something like that. So it's kind of like Yu-Gi-Oh, where you're making a very specialized deck as you go throughout the game, and that's what makes it very addictive. And that's why it's roguelite too, I think, because every time you go through a run, it's going to be different for you. And you're going to try a different strategy as you move forward. It gets progressively harder. Some encounters in these battles are not monsters that are attacking you. Sometimes they're special events that can give you gold. It can give you permanent upgrades as you go through the run. And then there's final boss levels at like the end of the stage, and it just keeps on going. I think you can beat the game. I haven't beaten the game yet, but I'm sure you can through a run. But yeah, it's like every time I go through this, I need to finish a run. Okay, I'm in the middle of it. I need to go back to it and go for it. And every time I start a run, I'm like, I don't want to stop. I'm like, just one more battle. One more battle. Okay, one more battle. And so yeah, this loop is very addicting. It's a great role-playing game. I would definitely I think it's on sale constantly on PC and other consoles as well. So go check it out. Slay the Spire, one of my favorite like card building, deck building games. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I know you've talked about it on the show a few times now, through various different episodes and stuff like that. But I'm glad you gave us like more of an explanation of what this game really is and what to expect from it, because it sounds like a cool game. This is one of those games that I've had installed on my Xbox forever, and I've just never gotten around to playing it at some point. But I definitely should at some point. I know that knowing that it's a roguelike is a bit of a turnoff for me, but I do think that sounds pretty cool. And it's definitely probably like the one I hear probably the card battling RPG I think that I hear people talking about the most, in the same way that people talk about Diablo when they're talking about dungeon crawlers. Like like that's probably the most popular example I can probably think of in the genre. But I'm sure maybe you'll surprise me later with stuff, Garret.
No, I think this game broke ground. Like it's like, oh, this can be a satisfying, like card battling mechanics can be a satisfying self-containing game within itself. It doesn't have to be a Hearthstone. It doesn't have to be a Yu-Gi-Oh. So I think they're doing a good job with it, and hopefully they create a sequel because this one's really addicting. And I'm not a roguelite person, guys. I love Hades, but I can't finish it because I'm not an like action-based guy itself. I don't know. Like other roguelites are fantastic. I know they're great games, but this one just really got my hooks in just because of the mechanics behind it. And I'm like, I know I'm defeated. And it's like, okay, let's go through another run and try a different strategy with a different character. This is gonna be so much fun. And that's I don't know. It keeps a loop on for me. Really good game.
Nice. Well, as for me, I'm going to transition to a game I've actually talked about on an episode not too long ago. But I didn't really, talk about it in any kind of depth or anything like that. But it's one of my examples of one of the more classic style approach to dungeon crawling games rather than, a modern innovative take on that. And that's Shining in the Darkness from Camelot. This was the precursor, of course, to the Shining Force series. I talked about this a little bit back on the Shining Force episode. But unlike the Shining Force games, this one is actually a first-person dungeon crawling role-playing game. So kind of like Diablo in a sense. You start off in this town, but you're not walking around a town from like an isometric view or anything like that, like you do in Shining Force. You actually have a first-person view of the town itself, and you basically like scroll through some slides of like the different like the item shop and the weapon shop and stuff like that in the town itself, and it's all like got this like hand-drawn kind of style to it, similar to how the Shining Force games look. So it's got that kind of graphical style going for it. And you basically the story is, a princess has gone missing. She's been captured in the dungeon. You basically got to go rescue her. It's not a really complicated story or anything like that. But what is really fun with this game is the exploration and the combat. I think are actually really fun. So it's a turn-based RPG. And it feels kind of like the combat from the Shining Force tactical games, but just a little bit less reliant on tactical. So you have, similar types of spells, for example, with your spellcasters as you do in the Shining Force games. And you just fight, different enemies like goblins and mats and a bunch of, traditional style fantasy enemies. But of course, drawn in that Camelot anime kind of style. So I... Cool. Really like going back to this game. It's a game that when I first played it, because this was on Sega Channel at the time when I was playing Shining Force 2. I talked about that, about how I got into RPGs was because of Sega Channel. So I remember playing this on Sega Channel and just not really appreciating it at that time because I wasn't really used to games like this and hadn't really played a game in this style before. But revisiting it a bunch of years later, because it actually is, I think, on Switch Online now. But it is also on the upcoming Sega Genesis Mini 2, as well as in the Sega Genesis collection if you purchased that on Switch before. Playing it all these years later, I gained like a new appreciation for the game and actually just found myself enjoying it a lot more. Yes, you can get lost really easily because there's no map, because it is like a very old school dungeon crawling RPG. But I still just had a lot of fun playing it. I just made sure to have to draw my maps myself on paper or on my tablet instead of...
Oh my goodness. That's cool, actually.
Yeah, because again, it's not like, a game like Persona Q or something like that where they give you like the bottom screen to do all that stuff. Like it's very old school. I'm not old school enough to, have, a bunch of graph paper just here on my apartment to do it that way. But, opening up a drawing app on my tablet usually worked just well enough to get through the game. So
it reminds me of engineering paper. I had to buy a lot of engineering paper in school because that was required for homeworks. And I could just imagine just like going through square by square in there and just putting different shades of pencil in there to identify what's the terrain. That's so cool, actually. I would play a game like that. That would be really neat.
Yeah, like it's such a different experience than what you play with modern games, because modern games are so helpful with a bunch of tools and tips to get you to know where you're going, whereas this is just like if you're not paying attention, well, you can get lost very, very easily, especially if you like made a mistake, writing like drawing out like your own map and stuff like that too. So it's interesting, but I do really like that game a lot, and I think that it's also like if someone wants to get into first-person dungeon crawling RPGs, I actually think it's actually a good starting point for people if they want to try that style of game, because I think it's very forgiving for new players because there's multiple difficulty modes for the game as well. And I think that if you play on the easiest mode, I think you're actually going to have like a pretty good time, barring, you know, the if you don't like drawing maps yourself, then you're probably not going to like it. But otherwise, I think it's a great example of like a classic, you know, first person dungeon crawling experience in the truest sense. So there you go, Shining in the Darkness.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Do you have Persona Q or Etrian Odyssey in your list? Just wondering.
I have it as an honorable mention. I have Persona Q in there.
Oh, okay. I just want to mention those games very much like that, and you can like have a bottom screen for your 3DS if you have those. So
yeah. And actually, there was a lot of like NES and Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis era games that were like this. Although the dungeon crawling games of that era were mostly on PC. But there was a lot of choice if you like this type of game. There's a lot of old games that I think for the most part probably hold up pretty well that kind of fill this niche as well. But I didn't want to fill my list with a lot of those. I wanted to bring in some modern examples as well. So maybe I'll talk about them another time. But I would say though, if you want to get this type of experience and you want to know where to start, besides, you know, maybe something like Persona Q or Etrian Odyssey, Shining in the Darkness I think is a great pick. But Garrett, let's move on to you. What do you got next for me, my friend?
Yes. Game number 2. This is the next one that got released, and I feel like this is the least favorite out of my list. But I'll go for it. The Witcher, Thronebreaker. I think people have heard of this name because of the series and the titles and everything, but they have no idea what this game is. Yeah. And I think, I get it. There's a lot of people don't get it. This is a card battling role-playing game. Its mechanics is the side game that came from The Witcher 3, which is Gwent. Gwent that CD Projekt Red kind of like, you know, put a side spin to it. Now it's a big whole online play card-based game too. But they also made this smaller containing single player isometric role-playing game that and with Gwent mechanics in there. Yeah, so if you guys don't know what Gwent is, it is a card game that you go through, and it's like a battle between your opponent. Very like similar to Yu-Gi-Oh. I feel like it's closest to Yu-Gi-Oh than any other of the traditional card games, where you have a hand of cards, and you have 3 aisles. You have the bowman, the range, the melee people, and then also the siege. And so depending on, you know, what kind of card you have in your hand, you're going to play it in that aisle. So like a catapult will go into the siege aisle and so on and so forth. Each of these cards have power points, some number of points, and your objective is to get the most points in that round. Now, there's a trick to it because you're going to run out of cards in your hand unless you draw cards based off card specifics. I won't get into that, but you want to kind of guess when the player's going to end their round. Maybe they'll end their hand short so they can grab more cards in the next round and the pacing like that. But you don't know that. So you got to place your cards strategically into the field and get enough points in best 2 out of 3 rounds to win the game. This was immediately addicting to me during The Witcher 3. So I'm like, all right, let me go for it for The Witcher. Thronebreaker is a side story, nothing to do really with The Witcher specifically. I think it's just some side characters in there. It has this kind of character art style, isometric view that I really enjoy. But yeah, the main battle is Gwent. What I don't really particularly care for this one is that there's actually a lot of set scenarios in this battle sequence. So instead of like a fresh battle from the beginning, they'll have some cards in there, and then you're going to have to figure out how to win the game. So there's like kind of maybe one way to win the game in each battle. So it can get a little tedious. I wouldn't recommend it for like beginner card-based RPGs. If you want to get into it, I wouldn't suggest this one unless you're like a huge Witcher fan and you absolutely love Gwent. then go for it. But yeah, I really enjoyed of what I played of it. I really liked Gwent though, so keep that in mind. But yeah, it's currently on sale for like I think like $6 on GOG and other sales, and it runs really great on Switch as well. So there you go, Witcher, Thronebreaker. That's the side game that no one knows.
Yeah, that's the one. Even like I'd always heard about, Thronebreaker coming out and stuff, but I literally knew nothing about it. Mainly because,
Yeah.
again, I just wasn't like super into Gwent or anything like that. So
Yes.
when I was playing The Witcher 3, I'm like, yeah, Gwent's okay. In fact, your comparison is interesting, Garrett, because actually I think it's closer to the name escapes me. But there's actually a Dota card game that totally failed miserably. But it also had like the 3-lane, like three row kind of system that Gwent has, and it was very similar, much more similar, I think, to that than something like Yu-Gi-Oh is. Whereas Yu-Gi-Oh is kind of like Magic the Gathering, but it's at like a, but it's like pasted differently. Is kind of how I.
It is pasted differently. Yeah.
Yeah, because like you don't have resources or anything you really have to work with in that game. I don't think you have those in Gwent either, but I think it's closer to that Dota card game. But yeah, it's interesting that they would make like it was cool that I like the idea that CD Projekt Red decided to at least take a chance, because they knew people liked Gwent and they liked RPGs, obviously, because they liked The Witcher 3. So why not combine them together? So like that makes perfect sense to me as to why a company would go and do that. So it's interesting that more people didn't take to it, or more people didn't get into that game or anything like that. Maybe
I still have all the Quint decks physically.
Oh my god,
So
that's too many. That's
I
too
love
many
it.
decks of cards.
Love it
But
so much.
I actually think maybe that's just a failing on CD Projekt Red's and for like not promoting the game well enough, or not explaining to people like what the game actually is. Because I think if most people actually knew what this game was, they'd probably be more eager to give it a chance, or at least try it out.
Yeah. A lot of people just saw an isometric view of Witcher, like in the Witcher style and setting. It's like, what is this game? I'm going to bail out. But actually, the mechanic is Gwent. And I don't think, a lot of people knew that.
Yeah.
So,
or not only
pretty
that, but if
interesting.
they look at it and they're like, well, it's a Witcher game without Geralt in it? No, thank you, good sir.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So
It's a side game.
that's an interesting pick, Garrett. I'm glad that you brought that up, because again, now I feel like I've been educated a little bit, because now I know at least a little more.
There you go.
Thronebreaker. I probably will never play it because I don't really like Gwent that much. But I think if you're into Gwent, maybe that's one to check out, and it's cheap. So there you go. And it was on Game Pass for the longest time too. But
Oh, really? I didn't
anymore.
even know that.
Yeah, that was like, I think it was I think it was in one of the first batches of Game Pass games. So it was a really long time ago. But as for me, I'm going to talk about another game that I've talked about on the show before. I talked about this on one of our indie showcases. But I think it's like one of the more popular modern examples of a take on a dungeon crawling game, and that is Darkest Dungeon. You have a party of 4 party members, and it has like roguelike elements to them, because these party members are auto generated, and you're not really having like the same party members throughout your entire experience. Like you're expecting that your party members are going to die off, and you're going to have to get more party members as you go through. But similar to what I discussed with both Diablo and Shining in the Darkness, Darkest Dungeon basically takes place in one town that's above a dungeon, and your job throughout the game is just to get to the bottom of the Darkest Dungeon. That's just the goal of the game. But it's like a really tactical.
It's depressing.
It is very depressing. Like especially because like it's not very many games where you have party members where that have status effects like they're depressed, or they're stressed out and they panic. Like it's kind of like a really stressful game to play in general. But I feel like it's like a very realistic approach to what, or at least a more realistic approach to a lot of other games would have to dungeon crawling, because likewise, to relieve a lot of these status effects, you have to go back to town, and to relieve stress, for example, you send your characters off to go get drunk somewhere, or go find entertainment somewhere. Like it feels like they're actually living real lives outside of them venturing into the dungeon, or at least to fix their own problems, from going too far into the dungeon. They have to go do real life things to kind of fix those problems. So I really enjoyed that, on top of the tactical approach to this game as well, because it is like teetering on the edge of being a tactical role-playing game, where there's a lot of strategy when it comes to the formation of the party itself, like who's in the front, who's in the back, and who's in the middle, because sometimes it'll switch up on you, and then if you put your vulnerable person in the back, they'll probably get targeted, so you have to it's better to put your vulnerable party members in the middle of the party, which again is not something you usually have to think about in a lot of RPGs, because a lot of times you think, like if you play a Final Fantasy game, you're like, oh, the healer character, whoever's the white mage, just goes in the back of the party, and then all the attackers go in the front, and then you kind of turn your brain off for the rest of the experience. Whereas this, you have to really think about that. And
you have to think about it, dude.
Yeah.
This game's hard.
Yeah. It is very, very, very difficult, but I think it's a very rewarding experience too. Like I think,
sure.
I think about it in the same way that I think about, Souls-like games as well, where, it's tough but fair, and you have to be really good at planning, I think, in order to do well in this game. But I really enjoy Darkest Dungeon. I think it's a great, modern dungeon crawling game, and it's not as, fun as a game like Diablo or Shining in the Darkness, but I think it's a very rewarding experience, and I think it's like one of the best modern dungeon crawling games. In fact, I think of all the games on my list, I think it's probably the best modern dungeon crawling game. So there you go, Darkest Dungeon.
That's nice. Darkest Dungeon out on Vita.
Out on Vita.
Go get it on Vita.
It's also pretty much literally on everything else except for the 3DS.
It's on everything.
Yeah.
Dang it, it's not on the 3DS. We got guys, homebrew community. You got this.
Actually, now that I think about it, I don't think it came to Wii U either. So maybe we need a we need a Wii U version of Darkest Dungeon, Garrett. We need it before the store goes down.
Before the shop closes.
Yeah. Before you can't add any more funds later. I think it's next week or whatever. I think the fund cutoff day is. So
via credit card or something.
Oh no. That's when you can no longer redeem points.
Oh.
Or sorry, shop credit. You basically are stuck with whatever funds you have left to buy things at that point.
Oh man.
Yeah. Which is too bad.
That's crazy.
But there you go. I had to include Darkest Dungeon, even though I know we talked about it before on other shows. And I talked about it really in depth during the indie showcase, so I don't want to give it too much of a spotlight here, but it's great. Go check it out. All right. Garrett, what do you got next?
All right. Game number 3. It is actually part of like one of my favorite indie studios. This is Steamroll Quest, Hand of Gilgamesh. Came out April 25th, 2019. This was released on PC and other consoles and on Stadia. Can you imagine? Coming out
I can imagine, Garrett. The power of Stadia. The power of
Stadia. It needed the power of Stadia. Anyways, this is a card battling kind of, it is as role-playing as it gets, which is actually kind of a first in the series. They were more of like a dungeon crawling kind of with Steamroll Dig, grabbing in resources and everything, but they built a card battling system from the ground up for this game specifically. This is the latest of the SteamWorld games, and I really enjoyed of what I played of it. It's really cool. Basically what you have in this one, it's very similar to Slay the Spire, but it's not roguelite. It is a story. You go through a story and you finish it. And you get cards as you progress through the story. You have, I think, set characters, 4 characters. Each of them have kind of their own strategy behind them. One can be more of a mage and more of a healer. One's a huge tank. One's a huge damage person. But actually, as you progress throughout the game, these characters, you can customize their decks however they want. So each of them has a different deck, and you customize it as you go along with the story. So the mage person doesn't necessarily have to be a healer or a huge buffer or whatever. They can do a lot of damage as well. So just depending on your strategy and how you face these enemies with cards, that's how you're going to roll with it. So I think it's a very competent card battling system, very competent, small indie role-playing game. I would definitely check out. And I I think it's just a fantastic game overall. I can't believe Image and Forward fascinates me because they do so many different things, not just this card battling system, but I just played the Gunk as well, and that's a completely different thing. A third, like a third person adventure platformer game or whatever. And the SteamWorld Dig games and also Heist is very different as well. So I'm glad that they're stretching out their kind of their chops or game designing chops, and I think they made a very good card battling small role playing game here. There you go.
Nice. Good to have some SteamWorld representation on this list as well. I know we've talked about SteamWorld a few times on the show, but I also really like that series a lot. And to your point, I like Image and Forum's games because like they're never afraid to try new stuff with their games.
Yeah.
And I always look forward to whenever a new one of their games is announced. I still haven't played the Gunk yet. I should do that at some point as well. It came out like late last year, but it's just I never got around to checking that one out as well. But I know it's on Game Pass. So I should share that at some point. But
I just beat it last week. It took like 6 hours or something. It was pretty small. I give it. It is the most 7 out of 10 I can give it. It has the most potential. I think game for them to be like I saw everything that they want to go for. I think the next game is going to be much better than the Gunk.
Nice. I remember too, reviews were very much actually agreeing with you on that one, where it was just very much a flat 7 for a lot of people.
Yeah.
There you go. All right. As for me, my fourth game is actually on the thumbnail for this video, and that's and it was really like one of the first games that I saw try and shoot across the bow at Blizzard and try their own Diablo-like game. But this one is a little bit interesting to play. And that game is a Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance for the original Xbox. It also came out on the PS2 as well. And it had a sequel as well, which is also a really good game on top of that as well. But it's close. Its sequel is more in the direction of like Diablo 2 it kind of is, where it's more like an exploration one. Whereas Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, it's in the D&D universe. And it is like based in the Baldur's Gate universe as well. If you played the older BioWare Baldur's Gate games, so you visit a lot of the same locations there. But Baldur's Gate itself is a city, and there's a dungeon below it, and you're going through that dungeon and killing a bunch of monsters and just having a good time with it. But what I liked about Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, first of all, I think you had more varied classes in this one versus Diablo 1, and it had a much better, I think, progression of skills than the original Diablo did. Not only that, but it just felt like perfectly at home on consoles because this didn't come to PC at all. I think Embracer Group actually owns the license to it now, so they've re-released this game on PC pretty recently. But the original version on consoles was just super fun to play with friends. I had a ton of fun memories playing this game on Xbox because it was very pick up and play. Like it was had 4-player co-op, and anyone could plug in a controller and play with you at any time. So it kind of felt like a brawler, but also like a dungeon crawler as well. And like Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance was a very, very, very fun and addictive game to play. Where similar to what you're talking about with Slay the Spire, Garrett. Like every time you were playing through it, I found it very hard to put the controller down. You're like, all right, let's do one more mission. Let's clear one more floor of this place. Let's keep going. Just a little bit, and then you realize, oh, it's 4 a.m. and the sun is going to come out soon, so maybe we should stop playing for the night. But I had to include it here because I think Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance is a really fun game, and I know that the modern version doesn't hold up super well, playing the re-release version, but I do still have very fond memories of just playing it on the original Xbox, so I had to include it on this list here as well. I think it's a great dungeon crawling game. So there you go.
Cool. I have no experience with Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, but I hear many great things about it. Did you say they re-release it? I thought they re-released something this year.
Yeah, they actually, because, Embracer Group just likes to re-release a bunch of old titles.
They like to do this.
Yeah. So they actually re-released not just Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, but Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance 2. So they actually did HD re-releases for both of them. And to what like truest example of what Embracer does, it's pretty much just the original game just ported as is.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Yeah.
There's not much additional features on top. Just let's port this over so
In
make a
fact,
quick
calling
buck.
it a remaster is a bit of a stretch. It's more like it's a re-release, more
It's
than
a
anything.
port.
It's a port.
Re-release.
Yeah, exactly. But again, I still think there's some fun to be had, but it's definitely like I think it's more fun actually playing on the couch with your friends with an original Xbox or a PS2 and just having a good time that way. And they're cheap games too, so they're well. The second one's a little more expensive, but the first one actually is fairly inexpensive if you want to go the OG route of playing it.
Nice.
All right, Garrett, what do you got next?
Cool, man. All right, next up, I mean, I would say this is a role. It's a game with role-playing game mechanics rather than being a role-playing game itself. And this came out in August 2019. I was addicted to it as well. This is Dicey Dungeons.
Ooh.
So it came out on PC and everywhere else. I actually got it on Switch later. It is also another roguelite. But instead of just like this fashion of here's a hand of cards and play cards against battling monsters, this is more with dice, right? And I love its style. It's very corny. It has that Cartoon Network animated drawn style, which I really enjoy. And this game, what you do is you pick a character and you go through the game, and that character has its own special abilities and buffs and debuffs and stuff like that. And you, instead of playing the card, you roll dice, and the dice can be, it's the six-sided dice. I think you get like 5 or 6 of them. I can't remember. But once it's rolled out, you have that dice, and you use that dice to play cards. And the cards are right in front of you. You have a set cards in the beginning, and then as you progress throughout like each battle, you get a card from a monster, and you can replace a card in your field or whatever. And then in these cards are like attack, poison, it could be defense, it could be like ice or fire damage, stuff like that. And you really got to work with the mental math a little bit in order to figure out what cards work best with the dice that you rolled in each turn. This is also insanely addictive, like Slay the Spire, I would guess. I did drop off of it a little bit earlier just because I just think the roguelite does catch up a bit with this one. It doesn't, like, I feel like I'm recycled a lot, and I'm like, I'm not playing as much as like, Slay the Spire, but it's still really, really good. Yeah, again, this is more, I think role-playing game is a stretch on this one. This is more like here's a roguelike dice based with some cards, and the combat's role-playing game mechanic-y, type of deal. But I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. It's on, I think it's on sale recently too. All of these games are indie games, by the way, and they're pretty small, so they've been on sale for quite a bit.
I was gonna say, like, most of the card battling RPGs are pretty much in the indie space only. Like, you don't really see a lot of high profile games that even have cards in them, let alone, games that, because I mean, cards I think just appeal to kind of a niche audience, except for, just normal playing cards. But beyond that, creating card games or even games based on cards are more niche. That's why, like, it's timely that you mentioned this, Garrett, because, we just heard about the delay to Marvel at Midnight Suns today, which was like a strategy role-playing game with Marvel characters like XCOM or, Mario plus Rabbids, but it had cards in it. And that was how you used your attacks. But then there's actually some word that they might actually remove. Like, the delay might be because they're removing the card element from the game, because so many people said they don't want to buy the game now because of the cards. So it's like it's really something that you just don't see that often with, AAA games or anything like that. But I'm not going to lie, Garrett, after listening to your explanation of Dicey Dungeons, I think that might have been like what sounds like one of the most complicated games we've ever talked about on this show, because of like how many
complicated.
Just how many elements of randomness are involved in this.
Right. It sounds complicated, but once, like, you look at the game, you look at the gameplay, Ryan, it's the most simple, like, aesthetically drawn. It is very simple shapes, hand drawn, it has a lot of jokes, very comedic, very dry humor throughout the game, which I really enjoy. But yeah, it can get you got to do a lot of mental math in this one to figure out how to beat your enemies.
Yeah.
But
And actually,
pretty fun.
that's something that comes inherently with a lot of card games too. That is worth mentioning. A
Mhm.
lot of them, especially if you're someone who's listening to this, who's maybe newer to these type of games or have never played them before. There is a lot of math involved with calculating, especially like any games that have like attack powers and defense powers assigned to them as well.
Right.
There's a lot of math that goes into that as well. So just bear in mind, you're gonna probably learn a little bit about math while you play some of these card battles.
Too bad.
As well. But yeah, my last game I want to talk about before I just throw in some honorable mentions at the end is a game that I don't think I've ever talked about on this show, but I know it's a game that's very popular from the PlayStation 1 era with a lot of, Square Enix fans at the time. Because I think I've talked about this on the show before, but the PlayStation 1 for Square Enix, kind of like this year in particular, for whatever reason, was kind of them being like, all right, we have like 12 ideas for different types of games. Let's just throw all of them out the wall and see what sticks. So
oh my goodness.
They actually created Vagrant Story for the PlayStation 1, which was their take on a dungeon crawling game, because Square Enix, again, not known for, dungeon crawling experiences at all. But this one in particular was very similar to this, and this was made by the creator of Parasite Eve, so it actually has a similar combat system to that game, where you're exploring this dungeon. Basically, you play as a knight who's entering this dungeon to try and track down this crazy cult leader and basically bring her back to justice. And that's pretty much the goal of the game. Again, there's not like a huge story here, because again, unlike a lot of Square Enix stuff, first of all, you don't really go around and talk to other NPCs. They made a point in the game when marketing the game to say that there are no shops to go to, there's no people to walk around and talk to or anything like that. You're pretty much just exploring this dungeon and not going back to town or anything like that, and you're basically fighting monsters. But there is a story that plays out, because what's interesting about this game is that you'll walk through the dungeon and you'll explore it a little bit, and then you'll hit a cutscene point, and then the cutscene will play, and then it will go into a turn-based battle, where as you go to make an attack, there will be this like kind of like grid that comes up over the main character, and depending on your positioning from the enemy in the grid will allow you to use different types of attacks. And likewise, you can also target different parts of the enemy's bodies, like you can target their heads or their legs or their body itself, in order to make them a little bit weaker to take down, especially with bosses. You want to aim for the legs or the arms first, and then maybe go for the head or the body to deal maximum damage while they're stunned. So it's like a very strategic game as well, but it's actually a lot of fun. It's another game like Shining in the Darkness that I just, at the time that I played it when the PlayStation 1 came out, like I remember being very excited about this, because this was when I was really getting into Square Enix games. I was so excited for Vagrant Story, and I remember we rented it and popping in, and I'm like, what the heck is this game? Well, like, what am I doing here? I had no idea like how to play this game, and it didn't help either that it didn't come with an instruction manual. We rented it, and there were no like strategy guide online for it, so I couldn't just go reference anything. So I kind of had to figure it out on my own at the time, and I had no idea what I was doing. But it's another game that, all these years later, I've heard so many people talk about good things about Vagrant Story. I'm like, okay, maybe I just wasn't in the right mindset when it came out, so maybe I need to go back and give this one a try. And sure enough, I liked it a lot more when I gave it a try again. I do think that the story is a little bit weaker than a lot of other Square Enix games that came out during the PlayStation 1 era, especially when you compare it to games like, Parasite Eve or Xenogears or, any of the Final Fantasy games. Like, there's no contest. Like, it's definitely a worse game than those games. But I think Vagrant Story is a pretty good PlayStation 1 dungeon crawling RPG, and it's one of the only games of this type that we ever got from Square Enix. So I really enjoyed this game a lot more revisiting it nowadays, and I think it's a cool game. So I had to include it here. Vagrant Story. I'll probably be talking about it more on Greatness Begins, because I will, spoiler alert, have an episode about Vagrant Story a little bit later on this year. So I'll talk about it.
I have it on Vita. Let's
There you
go.
go. There you go. You can actually go get on the PlayStation Store for PlayStation 3 right now for like $5 to play on your
Yeah.
Vita. Although I wouldn't be surprised if it came to PlayStation Plus Premium eventually. Who knows? Who knows?
Oh yeah, definitely. That would be cool.
But there you go.
Awesome.
All right, Garrett, final game. What
Yes.
do you got?
Final game. All right. And actually, I just wanted to shout this one out, and I have not played it, but I gotten through some reviews of it, so it's more of a shout out than an explanation than anything. This is a small indie game as well. Came out just last year in the summer called Griftlands. Ever heard of this game, Ryan?
No, go tell me more.
No.
Tell me more.
All right, so Griftlands is another roguelike card battling role playing game. I know you've been hearing this throughout the
Shocker.
list, but okay, here's the twist on this one. There are three different characters, have their own different storyline that you can play from beginning to end if you beat it up. And then like throughout the story, you have different personalities of each of these characters, and so in each kind of like conflict, you can have a social conflict against like another person, and so you have to negotiate with them based on cards. And that has its own like buff and debuff system as you go throughout that card battling game. Or it's a classic like Slay the Spire, like, okay, I'm battling, have some combat, here's my combat cards in my hand, let's go. It looks like it's a good even mix of both. You have two separate decks for your social deck and then your combat deck. And then depending on the choices you make, you can either be more aggressive and like be more with the combat deck, but then you kill a lot more people and become more like evil throughout your story. Or you could be more social about your conflicts and maybe you'll just get by depending on which character you choose. I heard there's a lot of replayability of this game as well. I had it on my Steam wish list. I just never gotten it yet. So when it goes on sale on Steam or whatever, I will definitely pick it up and give it a go. But yeah, I just wanted to shout out. That's the latest of the card battling role-playing games out there. Griftlands, another small indie game. You know, I just hope in the future, I wish just one, even like a AA studio of some kind. Marvel Midnight Suns, please don't remove the card battling system. It would be great to have this implemented, you know, as a unique mechanic in role-playing games for sure.
Yeah, I think out of all of the modern games, probably the highest profile one is, or at least what from like the AA space, is like the Isle of Cards, the Square Enix games that came out recently, but those aren't even really like card battling RPGs. Like,
they're really not.
They're really just turn-based RPGs that just have cards on the attacks themselves. But
it's not. Yeah, exactly. It's not a card battling role-playing game. They just decided to make cards the aesthetic.
Yeah,
for
like
that's a very small turn-based game.
That's literally the closest we've gotten in like the double or AAA scene. So yeah, you're right. I would love to see more of it. I think that would be really cool because again, we see a lot of AAA effort go into making games based off the popular card-based games like Yu-Gi-Oh, like Magic the Gathering. I would love to see like that effort maybe go into like a card battling RPG. I think that'd be really cool. But we'll see. Maybe one of these days, Garrett. Who knows? If people keep buying these card-based RPGs, or maybe if one of these indie studios gets big enough, maybe we'll see one of these one day.
Maybe.
But anyways, let's run through some honorable mentions real quick if you have any, Garrett. I'll start though. I mentioned it before, but Persona Q I think is a great dungeon crawling game.
I love that one
as well. And again, I think like it's another good place to start if you want to try this type of game as well. I think like that's a good starting point, especially because of the touchscreen functionality with the 3DS. I think really helps with that game. Or Persona Q2 I think also helps as well, but I know people don't like that one as much. But then I got to go old school with my other two honorable mentions. Might and Magic. It's a long running series from Microprose, the creator of Worms. This is like an old school first person dungeon crawling series. I remember playing it on CD-ROM on my 486 in DOS.
Oh goodness.
And just having a ball playing Might and Magic, and they made like 10 of them. So there's a ton of these games. Like it was a really, really long running franchise. But they've never rebooted or anything like that. They did like Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, which was like a Skyrim or an Oblivion clone, but on original Xbox. But that was kind of the latest game in the series. But Embracer owns them, so who knows? Maybe we see them come back.
They may port it.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, good God.
Upgraded.
I mean, I thought it was bad enough when they ported the original Master of Orion, but who knows what they do with these ones. And then my other one is a very old school one as well from 1985, Gauntlet, which was an arcade game.
Gauntlet, yes.
That then, of course, came famously to the Atari 2600 and then 5200 and the NES and, pretty much every console under the sun. Whenever there's a new Atari collection, Gauntlet is usually there. And you play as one of 4 classes, and you're going and mowing down groups and groups of enemies as you progress through a bajillion floors of this dungeon. So, and it's meant to be your quarters, so of course it's difficult. So, there you go. Had to include Gauntlet though, the OGest of OG dungeon.
I played one of the Gauntlets, like one of the recently developed. I think it was on Xbox Games with Gold.
Oh, okay.
Or whatever. Yeah, it was like Gauntlet 2 or 3 or whatever.
Because they made sequels to Gauntlet, and they were pretty much just the same as the original Gauntlet in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they had Gauntlet Legends on the N64, which I know people like that game too. And that was kind of like the only time that I think they tried to really reboot Gauntlet and to try and make it a 3D game, which is interesting.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But Garrett, what about you? Did you have any honorable mentions? I don't know if you do, because I know you just had a game that you hadn't played yet.
Dude, I just expelled my list, and I'm realizing, guys, the card battling role-playing games, underrepresented. I know people out there don't really particularly care for card battling based games, as I can tell from the responses to this topic. But I think it's very well underrepresented. I think there's a lot of potential for a developer, a AA developer, to really hit gold for this one and make it extremely addictive and extremely fun and a self-containing role-playing game. Not a live service online play that we see with Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh, so on and so forth.
But those aren't even really RPGs, so they don't really count. But
they don't count.
But I will throw an honorable mention on your behalf, Garrett, for battling RPGs. Go
for it.
And that is Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories on the PlayStation 1. That's a Yu-Gi-Oh! Game, and it's basically based off the first and second season of Yu-Gi-Oh! It's kind of the events take place between season 1 and 2, but the rules are from season 2, because season 1's rules of Yu-Gi-Oh! Made literally no sense, because there was a turtle that could catapult a guy into the moon, which then would somehow stop the tide of the ocean.
It was the first season.
It was fine, but that game is like a really good role-playing game based off the Yu-Gi-Oh! TV show that also is all about playing the cards from Yu-Gi-Oh! And as you go, you get, new abilities for your duelist while also earning new cards. And I think that's also like a really underrated RPG that came out towards the end of the PlayStation 1 life cycle I know a lot of people just missed it, because most people had moved on to the PlayStation 2 at that point. But I actually think that that's like a pretty good deck battling RPG, and I wanted to make sure to give it a shout out here as well.
I also want to mention another Yu-Gi-Oh game. I think I actually mentioned this out a few episodes back. Yu-Gi-Oh! Nightmare Trapdoor.
Yeah,
that's the one role-playing game I played.
That's a good one.
Very similar.
Yeah.
That you played, and IGN gave it a 7 out of 10. How dare you?
Well, they just didn't like Yu-Gi-Oh!
10 out of 10 in my heart.
Well.
Yeah. But yeah, you progress through the story. It is its own story too. It's not like you're Yugi or whatever. You're your own character that plays with the season 1 characters. And you go from beginning to end. You go through the tournament. You face everyone, and oh my gosh, I think that was peak Yu-Gi-Oh! For me, is that game. Yeah. It had all the recent season 1, kind of post season 1 type of cards, right before Elemental Heroes and Yu-Gi-Oh! GX and all that stuff happened.
Yeah, so. No one likes any of that GX stuff. Please. Yeah. But or just card games on motorcycles, Garrett, with that series.
Oh no.
Afterwards. Yeah. But
It's like season 4 or 5.
no, that's a completely different show. It's Yu-Gi-Oh! ZX or something like that. But it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's all good. Yu-Gi-Oh! Games are actually really fun. They're actually underrated, even if you don't get the RPG ones. Like Dawn of Destiny for the Game Boy Advance. That one's really good. Based off where
the latest one is good
around
too.
Battle City. Yeah. Legacy of the Duelist is pretty good too. The new one. But there you go. Well, anyways, let's let our community members in as well, Garrett, because we asked the community what they thought about tonight's topic, and we got some responses, Garrett. Let me tell you what. But we also got some questions in here as well, so we'll get to those as well.
The slander.
We're going to start with TPR saying dungeon crawling, and it ain't even close. Slay the Spire can only carry Garrett so far. The slander game.
Dang.
The slander from TPR. Just the savage.
Who's he? I don't know him.
He has his own PlayStation podcast now.
Oh, good for him.
Yeah, go listen to No Limits over at Save the Game Media over there.
Nice. TPR, I just gave you 4 other games. Card battling, role-playing games. Very good. Try them out. I highly, actually, out of the list, if you don't care about roguelites, I really do recommend SteamWorld Quest. It is a very solid role-playing game that has card battling mechanics. That's the one I would highlight out of the 5.
Nice. Well, we got Awesome Dave 1337 who says, dungeon crawlers are easily the cooler style. If I wanted to play with cards, I'd play solitaire. Again, the slander.
The slander.
But even I, on the side of, dungeon crawlers here, I actually like card battling games too. So I feel bad when I have to read out comments like this one.
Awesome Dave. Gosh, no. It's like saying if I want to play with set pieces in a tactical role-playing game, I'd play chess. No, I want to play my Fire Emblem. I want to play, Final Fantasy Tactics Ogre Reborn coming out later this year. I'd rather play that than chess.
Yeah.
Even though I do like to play chess quite a bit.
Yeah, exactly. Next up, we got Hopple on Twitter who says, replace or with and. So that, what's cooler, dungeon crawling RPGs and card battling RPGs instead of or.
They're both.
Pretty cool. Hopple likes both, but then I responded there with a gift from the hit movie Highlander, saying there can only be one. And then Hopple responded, why can't we have both? And then, well, I just liked the tweet and then that went on my way. So what does that say about me? But there you go. Thank you, Hopple, for that. And then we got 2 questions, but also one person on your side. We got Nagachaka, Garrett, who says, card battling RPGs, hands down. What's my argument? Baten Kaitos, which I can't believe we both forgot. But you didn't play GameCube games, and I never played
didn't play.
Yeah, to be fair, neither of us have played Baten Kaitos, even though I played a lot of GameCube games, and then just Garrett didn't have a GameCube. So
actually, I would love to play this. Oh my gosh, right. It's the Monolith Soft developed Namco published GameCube game.
Yeah, with card battling. And they didn't make just one of them, Garrett. They made 2 of them. So
they made 2 of them.
Yeah, because there's also Baten Kaitos Origins, which, as luck would have it, Garrett, is one of the most expensive GameCube games. So, which is already
$350. Yeah, in eBay at least.
Yeah,
$65 for the. I think that's the first one.
Yeah, the first one's like it's not terribly priced, but the second one is like spun out of control, just like Fire Emblem on that console as well. But Nagachaka has a question for us, and he says, my question for this week's episode: what is your favorite RPG of 2022, and why is it Xenoblade Chronicles 3? But before you get into it, Garrett, I have to update you because. Look what I got in the mail.
Oh, yay!
I know.
You got them.
So they actually were. So for folks at home who are listening to the podcast, and if you're not watching on YouTube, I held up a copy of Torna, the physical copy of Torna, and then Xenoblade Chronicles 3. The special edition contents of 3 are coming later. I think they're coming in September. So I'll unbox those when they come in. But I had like a problem with the mailing service where they were being rerouted back to Nintendo. And I had to go call and sort it out because they couldn't find a way to deliver packages in my building. But enough about all that. So I just haven't really played Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Nagachaka. I know a lot of people are on Discord. are very chatty about this game right now, Garrett. So
They're very chatty, yes.
I'm going to go to you kind of here. What is your favorite RPG of 2022? And is it Xenoblade Chronicles 3 or is it something else?
I don't think the was it the my favorite RPG hasn't even, released yet this year.
Yeah.
And that's Mario plus Rabbids 2. You guys wait. That thing is gonna come out and it's so good. I loved the first game. I really enjoyed it. So I cannot wait. Actually, I think I'm a little bit more excited about Mario plus Rabbids 2 compared to Xenoblade Chronicles 3. With that said, this is a very strong year of role-playing games, especially on the Switch. I played Legends Arceus. I was very surprised by it. I played a little bit of Triangle Strategy. I really enjoyed of what I played of it, but I definitely am prioritizing Xenoblade Chronicles 3 right now. I'm about 11 hours in. I think it's gonna be my favorite Xenoblade Chronicles game out of the three. I think it improved. It totally went in the direction that I wanted it to. It too had some faults that I didn't particularly care for, mainly the story, mainly the blade driver system. They got rid of all that and really mainline the combat. It feels a lot more rewarding, and I love the story of this. It kind of go back to the first game's roots with the story. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it so far.
Nice. That's awesome, dude. Yeah, I'm actually very excited to try it out later this year. I know that even though I told this on the podcast before, but I was only got my copy now so I could get the special edition with intention of playing it probably in like over the holidays is kind of when I'm expecting to try it out. Or at least I kind of want to try it out at least a little bit before we do our game of the year conversation later this year. So look out for that. And like you, I think probably my favorite RPG of this year eventually will be a game that isn't out yet. Whether that's Soul Hackers 2 or Valkyrie Elysium.
Soul Hackers 2 is a big one too, yeah.
Or Mario plus Rabbids or, Star Ocean. There's a lot of like really cool RPGs that are coming out later this year that I'm excited about. So I definitely think like my favorite of the RPG of the year could be toppled. But my favorite right now is actually Live Alive. I just finished it last week. I loved Live Alive. Cool. I think that game's awesome. The only downside is it gets a little grindy towards the end, but other than that, I really, really enjoyed my time with it. But before that, nice. the front runner before that was Triangle Strategy. So I'm all about HD 2D this year, Garrett. Like my two favorite RPGs of the year, of course, are two HD 2D games. But yeah, I love both those games. I think they're both amazing. But Live Alive is definitely my front runner currently at this point in the year. But I think there's a long line of games to come later in this year, Garrett, as far as RPGs go. And I think
so many RPGs.
I think there's some heavy hitters coming. But again, the one I'm most excited about is Valkyrie Elysium, especially because I love the Valkyrie profile games. And after that last trailer, I'm just so much more excited about that game than I was before. And Soul Hackers too. I'm actually like, I can't believe that game is going to be here in like 3 weeks. I'm very excited to try that one out.
That's crazy. I want to get it, but I don't know. I'll have time. Like if I buy it, like I'm not gonna have time to play it. So.
Well, the nice thing is, Garrett, it's a Sega game, so it'll go on sale at some point. So.
That's true. It'll go on Game Pass pretty soon.
There's that too. It might actually come to Game Pass. Oh, and then of course we got Persona at the end of the year too, and I'm gonna have to play that again. So.
Oh no! Don't say that.
I
want to play Royal. I never played Royal.
Oh my god! I'm gonna play Royal on Xbox. I need those achievements.
Me too.
I need that because I have the platinum for Royal on PlayStation. I need to get the 1,000 gamer score for it on Xbox as well, just to double dip.
You got to get the PS5 trophies too, right? I don't think those carry over.
No, well. The game doesn't carry over. You'd have to buy it again. I don't know if I want to do that.
Yeah, you have to buy it again, which sucks.
Yeah, so I'm not going to do that. But yeah, so those were our front runners so far in Nagachaka. But we'll have that conversation a little bit later this year because I'm excited to talk more about RPGs later this year. And then
so many.
The last question of the week comes to us from Ginji37, who asked the question, what is a good card battling RPGs for those of us who have never played one before? Where should they start?
That's a good question. Where should they start? You know what? I would say, the two games I've listed in the list. I think if you really don't like roguelite and you're into self-containing single-player role-playing games, definitely SteamWorld Quest Hand of Gilgamesh. I think that's a very solid card battling game. But I think if you don't mind roguelikes, Slay the Spire is so easy to get into, I think, just because the first few battles are just attack and defense. And you just have your hand and like you're ready to go. And you slowly build up over time and you kind of get it after a round. You're like, oh, this is what this game is about. And you go through another run again. And it's just as satisfying as the first. And it's just a great loop. So I would say definitely Slay the Spider if you don't like if you don't mind roguelikes. But if you just want a self-containing single-player RPG, SteamWorld Quest is a good alternative as well.
Nice. Well, I mean, the main thing is just don't start with Dicey Dungeons and you'll probably be okay.
Don't start with Dicey Dungeons, but you can get it for like $4. Then yeah, totally try it out.
Do it.
That one's fun too.
That's the nice thing about card battling RPGs, to your point, Garrett. If you want to try, if you're new to it and you want to try a whole bunch of them, you can probably get like all of the good ones for like under $50.
Honestly, yeah. If you look at the games list, I could easily see Witcher Thronebreaker being okay in USD. It would be like $8. Slay the Spire would be like around there too. SteamWorld Quest would be more like 15. Yeah, you could get this for like $30, all of them on sale if you want.
The full Garrett Bland recommended package for under $30. Whereas
just
mine,
you know what?
Mine's a little more expensive.
That's a good package. When Black Friday comes around and when all these games are on sale, I'm gonna put the Garrett Bland card battling welcome package together, and I'm gonna share it to all of you guys.
Yeah, I actually think that's a good idea. I think that's something we should do when Black Friday approaches, because I think that would be
definitely
something we can tell people more about. But anyways, I think that's gonna do it for tonight's episode. But before we go, Garrett, plugs go.
You can follow me on Twitter at Blind Explosion. You can also find me on the Nintendo Shack, part of the Play Some Video Games Podcast Network, where we're live each and every Thursday, except for this week, even though this podcast comes out later. Or if you're on Patreon, you're listening earlier. We're doing it Wednesday this week. So over at twitch.tv/PSVG. And we release on all podcast services, Google, Apple. We're also on YouTube, so check us out over there. And I'll eventually stream when I have free time over at twitch.tv/Blind Explosion, and go follow me, even though I don't stream at all right now.
Nice. It's almost like
I will though.
You learn from me when it comes to that stuff. But also, I know you guys are probably talking about Splatoon this week, right? I'm guessing that's going to be the big thing
definitely.
You're talking about.
Let me tell you, if you thought I was hyped about Xenoblade Chronicles 3, you didn't see nothing yet with Rebecca. She is totally thrilled. I think she's the number one Splatoon fan out there, that as far as I can tell. She is very excited about this.
I'm very excited to watch that episode, especially because like half an hour of Splatoon stuff. You guys are going to learn a lot of stuff, so it's going to be a fun episode.
Definitely.
For y'all. As for me, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. I'm taking, again, a little bit of a Twitter hiatus as far as tweeting, but I'm always there still, responding to tweets and stuff like that, or DMs. You can check me out over there. You can also follow us on Twitter at Carpool Gaming if you want to go interact with Court Lalonde. He's over there, but also all of our podcasts are over there as well. You can also find us on Patreon at patreon.com/Carpool Gaming, on YouTube at youtube.com/Carpool Gaming, on podcast services around the globe. So, for Garrett Bland, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been the 59th level of the RPG Cave, and we're out.
Bye-bye.